A major decision was just reached by the United States Supreme Court in a unanimous decision. The Supreme Court has rejected efforts to limit access to mifepristone. You'll recall that a right-wing district court judge had previously ruled that there would be severe limits and a ban on mifepristone. That order, however, was stayed by the United States Supreme Court for proceedings to take place before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals then heard that case following the district court's ruling which banned it. The Fifth Circuit applied some additional restrictions to the distribution and sale of mifepristone and found that certain FDA regulations were unlawful. And that was stayed pending oral argument before the United States Supreme Court in the case Food and Drug Administration versus the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, FDA v. Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. The decision by the Supreme Court was issued moments ago, and what the Supreme Court held is that these kind of right-wing groups that were seeking to have mifepristone banned and to strike down FDA regulations, that these right-wing groups lacked what's called standing to even bring the case in the first place. In other words, that they were not personally or as a group injured by these FDA regulations that allowed a wider distribution of mifepristone. Again, it was a unanimous decision. The decision was authored by Justice Kavanaugh, who is a Trump appointee, kind of rare unanimous decision from the Supreme Court, 9-0. Let me just share with you what the Supreme Court wrote so you have a sense of what they said. And I always want to tell you what happened, but then show you, their language, and then we can break it down. But to be clear, the Supreme Court has rejected any of the restrictions that were being sought on mifepristone by these right-wing groups that sued the FDA and said that these FDA actions that actually made mifepristone more available to people, that found mifepristone to be safe and to be used in connection with women's reproductive rights. These right-wing groups tried to ban it. A right-wing district court judge tried also to ban it and ruled on it. The right-wing Fifth Circuit also had some very serious bans when it came to mifepristone, but the Supreme Court saying that these groups that sought the ban, that achieved it, did not even have the right to sue, and therefore mifepristone may be distributed, may be sold in its generic form or otherwise, as it had been in the past, and that these restrictions would not apply. So here's a brief summary of what went down. So in 2000, the Food and Drug Administration approved a new drug application for mifepristone tablets marketed under the brand name Mifeprex for use in terminating pregnancies up to 7 weeks. To help ensure that Mifeprex would be used safely and effectively, FDA placed additional restrictions on the drug's use and distribution, for example, requiring doctors to prescribe or to supervise prescription of Mifeprex and requiring patients to have 3 in-person visits with the doctor to receive the drug. In 2016, the FDA relaxed some of these restrictions, deeming Mifeprex safe to terminate pregnancies up to 10 weeks, allowing healthcare providers such as nurse practitioners to prescribe Mifeprex and approving a dosing regimen that required just 1 in-person visit to receive the drug. In 2019, FDA approved an application for a generic mifepristone. In 2021, FDA announced that it would no longer enforce the initial in-person visit requirement. So 4 right-wing medical association groups and some individual doctors, right-wing doctors, moved for a preliminary injunction that would require the FDA to either rescind the approval of mifepristone or to rescind FDA's 2016 and 2021 regulatory actions. Danco Laboratories, which sponsors Mifeprix, intervened to defend the FDA's actions. So then you had the district court ultimately agreeing with the plaintiff doctor groups, the right-wing doctor groups. That was Matthew Kaczmarek, federal judge Matthew Kaczmarek from the Northern District of Texas in that decision, and ordered mifepristone off the market. The FDA and Danco appealed and moved to stay the district court's order pending appeal. The Supreme Court stayed or paused the district court's order pending the disposition of proceedings before the Fifth Circuit. Then the Fifth Circuit hears the case. The Fifth Circuit finds that these right-wing groups have standing to sue. It concludes that the FDA's 2000 and 2019 drug approvals are okay. However, that the FDA's 2016 and 2021 actions were unlawful. And so there would be a significant ban on the type of delivery and distribution and sale of mifepristone and its generic form as well. So then the Supreme Court granted what's called certiorari to hear oral argument. Then the Supreme Court goes into its analysis on what standing is, and it says, this is Justice Kavanaugh writing for the court, says, Article 3 standing is a bedrock constitutional requirement that the court has applied to all manner of important disputes. Standing is built on a single basic idea of the separation of powers. Article 3 confines jurisdiction of federal courts to cases and controversies. Federal courts do not operate as an open forum for citizens to press general complaints about the way in which the government goes about its business. To obtain a judicial determination of what the governing law is, a plaintiff must have a personal stake in the dispute. So before you can even get to the next issue over whether the mifepristone approvals by the FDA on the merits were valid or invalid, you first have to basically show that you have a ticket, if you will. I'm oversimplifying that you have a ticket to go into federal court to even argue your case, that you've actually been injured and that you're not just arguing for some general grievance, but that you have a personal stake. So the question is were these right-wing doctor groups personally injured? Do they have a personal stake, or are they just asserting kind of general complaints about the government? And ultimately, the Supreme Court said you don't have a personal stake. You're just pressing a general stake. You're just pressing general grievances about the government. And so here's the kind of the crux of the ruling. Plaintiffs are these right-wing groups. They oppose elective abortion. And yes, they have their own ideological objections to mifepristone. But plaintiffs do not prescribe or use mifepristone. Plaintiffs are unregulated parties who seek to challenge the FDA's regulation of others, not themselves. Plaintiffs advance several complicated causation theories to try to connect the FDA's actions and say that they've been personally injured, but none of these theories suffice to establish Article 3 standing. Then the court just goes over a few examples of what they're arguing. Like these plaintiffs first contend that the FDA's relaxed regulation of mifepristone may cause downstream conscience injuries to the individual doctors, that they will be forced to prescribe mifepristone. But the court explains that there's already a federal law that allows doctors who have conscious objections to doing that not to do that, and they won't be punished. So the court says you're not injured there. You're not forced to prescribe it if you don't want to prescribe it. Then next it says plaintiffs assert that they have standing because the FDA's relaxed regulation of mifepristone may cause downstream economic injuries to doctors, citing various monetary and related injuries that they will allegedly suffer somehow diverting resources and time from other patients, but that's speculative and doesn't make sense at all. And then finally, they argue that if they don't have standing, nobody will have standing. And the Supreme Court says you can't assert standing by claiming that nobody has standing. That's not a valid way of doing that. So unanimous decision by the court. Mifepristone will not be banned. I think the Supreme Court got it right on this one. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 3 million subscribers together. And a unanimous decision, by the way.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Midas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.